All right, everyone, it is 2 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Good afternoon. I am Taylor Post, Swiftland's office manager, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Customer Service Masterclass, Extra Smile, Extra Mile, and today's presenter, Linda Bruno. Linda Bruno has been developing and conducting training workshops for libraries and other organizations for more than 15 years. She offers workshops on topics ranging from leadership skills to returning balance in lots of areas in between. Linda received her MBA from the University of Florida and has years of experience in hands-on management positions. She develops her workshops based on solid research and, more importantly, real-life application. Linda is also certified with DDI and Achieve Global. Please welcome Linda and enjoy her webinar this afternoon. Linda?
Thanks so much, Taylor. Welcome everybody to today's session. I heard Deb and Taylor talking earlier that it was very windy where they were at and somebody had rain and I've got partly cloudy skies. So I have an extra smile on my face today because right now there's no rain and there's not a lot of wind. So we're going to talk about why the extra smile is so important to the extra mile. And basically, what we're going to talk about is it's really hard to go the extra mile if you don't have a positive attitude. And it's really hard to keep the loyalty and the support of your patrons if we're not trying to go the extra mile sometimes. I want to give you just a very quick personal example that happened to me just a week ago this past Monday. Workers were supposed to be here at 8 o'clock in the morning. They scheduled that time. I did not. At 8:15, I picked up the phone to see if I had gotten something wrong, and the owner of the company answered the phone and said, Mrs. Bruno. Before I even said anything, he recognized my number, apparently had it keyed in or whatever. He said, we had a meeting that ran a little longer than it was supposed to. And I said, well, I just wanted to make sure somebody was still going to be here. Oh, yeah, he'll be there as soon as the meeting's over. I'm thinking he'll be here in a half an hour. At 10 o'clock, I picked up the phone to cancel that appointment, and they just happened to pull around my block at that time. And the reason I didn't cancel earlier was because I tried to get other people in the same profession and had just as much trouble. Here's the question I have for you, and this is why I tell you those kinds of stories. Do you think there's any loyalty for me with that company? Just a yes or a no in the chat box. I see a lot of you typing, and I know those answers are going to be no. There isn't any. And here's the deal. All it would have taken, although there really isn't any loyalty for me because of the way I was treated, there was no extra mile. You know, things happen. Meetings go longer than they should. I'm pretty realistic about those kinds of things. I actually was working on a program on patience the day that happened. So I was really trying to practice what I preach and trying to be very even mannered about that and so forth. But here is where the extra mile could have come in. I sensed in his tone when I called that he was frustrated that I had called. That's issue number one. There should have been a very pleasant, I'm so sorry, we'll be there by 9:30 or whatever it was. Between 8:15, the first time I called, and the time the technician showed up at my door, no one called me back to tell me that they were on their way, that they were running late, that they were doing anything. There was no extra mile. There wasn't even the original mile, in my opinion. And that's what I want you to grasp from today. As we go through our days, things happen, don't they? Every single day, something happens that we could grab hold of and really turn it to a negative and not smile at the next person and not go the extra mile because, after all, look how I was treated earlier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to really open your eyes to that today. So if you've got your handouts, and Taylor sent them with the link today, so you should have them available to you. This is, as many of my programs are, because this is the kind of topic I love to work with. This is one of those evergreen topics that you may get a grasp on this today and do much, much better for the next 5 days or 5 weeks or 5 months. But for a lot of us, we can slide backwards really easy and forget about that extra smile or going the extra mile. So it might be wise for you to go ahead and print those handouts and fill in the blanks as we go because you've got them to turn back to when maybe things aren't as rosy as you would like them to be. So the first comment on the top of page 1 says, one of the primary reasons it's hard to go the extra mile with an extra smile is that sometimes we're surrounded by negativity. And I love this quote at the bottom of the slide. You can't have a positive life with a negative mind. You can't serve your patrons in a positive way with an extra smile if your mind is always focused on the negative, can you? And yet it's all around us. And I love technology for a tool, but I'm going to tell you that I think technology is one of our biggest issues in the area of negativity these days. It's just one of those things that has really swamped us with negativity. And so we have to try a little harder to overcome that so that when we go to work tomorrow, we're going to have that extra smile. We're going to go the extra mile. So when you're thinking about negativity, you need to think about where it's coming from. And the first one may make some of you a little antsy. It may make some of you feel like I've stepped on your toes, but a lot of our negativity comes from within, doesn't it? I'm reading a book on positivity right now by the positivity guru. Her name is Barbara Fredrickson. And I hadn't even read the book before I put this particular session together, but I've read tons of material over the last few years, books and articles, and I've gone to webinars about negativity, positivity, and all those kinds of things. But one of the things that the book talks about is that we have to deal with this ourselves. Nobody's going to come along, including Linda Bruno today, and wave a magic wand over us and say, okay, now you're going to feel positive forever and you'll be able to smile and give extra mile service. It's just not going to happen. It has to come from within, just like the negativity is in us. Think about this. If you get up tomorrow morning and you're running a little bit late and you go out to the kitchen and you get ready to pour a bowl of cereal and the dog wants to be let out and one of your children is looking for something, and as you're pouring the milk you get distracted, it slips out of your hands and it falls onto the floor. When we are saturated in negativity, our first thoughts set up our entire day. And our first thoughts in that situation could be, if we're surrounded by negativity, that I can't believe this. The whole day has started out bad. The kids are bugging me already. The dog needs to go out. I don't know why we got a dog. Those kinds of things. From my perspective, and I haven't gotten that far in the book that I'm reading, but from my perspective, when I catch myself doing something like that, and I do, and a lot of you know me well enough to know that I'm fairly positive most of the time. Had a lot of stuff go on in my life in the last 10, 11, 12 years, and I try to keep that positive focus. So if I do something like that, I'll catch myself saying, oh, of course that's going to happen. Or with my luck, those negative terms we use sometimes, and we convince ourselves of that. I will catch myself and say, that's not serving me well. I'm just thankful that wasn't a glass jug. I'm just thankful the dog likes milk and he got the bulk of the liquid cleaned up so that I can use a wet cloth and clean up the rest of the floor or whatever it might be. But it's not our natural tendency to do that. So recognize if this is an area for you. And for some of us, it's a bigger area. For some of us, it's our natural drift to go toward that negative. If we started our day that way and we get in the car and we drive to the library and it's raining and the door is still locked and we can't get in and we're getting wet, do you see how that just continues to spiral down? There is no switch that you can flip when you walk in that library door so that you put on that extra smile for patrons because you've already allowed that spiral to continue. Taylor, I don't know if you see Abby's comment, but I didn't know if you wanted to address that directly to her in a private chat or whatever, but she seems to be having trouble again today. So from within is one of the places that negativity comes. And guess what? Because we work with human beings, our coworkers can be the negativity that's surrounding us. And again, our natural bent is often to absorb that like a little sponge, isn't it? And to say, yeah, you're right. I can't believe they did this. And can you believe Mrs. Smith did this? Those kinds of things. So the negativity can come from our coworkers. And of course, the negativity can and does sometimes come from our patrons. So it needs to be our responsibility to say, you know what? I realize all these things are going on, but I'm not going to go there. I'm going to find happiness in this moment, joy in this moment, contentment in this moment, whatever it might be. And I'm going to find a reason for myself to be positive. So, what I want to ask you is under number 3, what kinds of circumstances do you find yourself becoming negative? And what kinds of circumstances does that happen for you? Just in general. For instance, and you don't have to give me as specific as this, but I don't like when other people disrespect me. And that's how I felt last week when they waited 2 weeks to show up. It was almost as if, because of the community I live in, which happens to be a retirement community, that I was just sitting here eating bonbons and just couldn't wait for that technician to come and visit with me. And I felt very disrespected by that, almost condescending. And so that's one of the things that really pushes me toward the negative. Here's what I did because I was supposed to be practicing patience that day. When the fellow came to the door, he said, "How are you doing today?" That was his first words. No, no apology or anything like that. And I said, "Well," very calm, very kindly, I said, "I'm kind of irritated." I said, "I re-planned my entire day based on the time you said you would be here, or your boss said you would be here." He said, "Well, our meeting went over." Still no apology or anything. So as I was mulling that over, my typical response, to be honest with you, just a few years ago would have been to be pretty much rude all day just because I felt so disrespected. But I thought, you know what? I'm practicing patience. I'm going to practice positivity. I said to him, "Would you like a cup of coffee?" And he kind of looked at me like, "What? Are you really saying that?" And he said, "No, I'm okay." And then a little later, when I brewed a cup of coffee, he said, "That does kind of smell good." So I brewed him a cup of coffee, trying to turn that whole negative thing into a positive. So some of you have responded. Glenn said being ignored and not being listened to. Absolutely, Glenn, in any manner, right? And I may not be right in whatever I'm saying, but at least listen to me and then you can tell me I'm wrong, right? Gerard said when a coworker makes the same mistake over and over after talking to him, because that person maybe isn't listening, but let's turn that around a little bit. There's a reason they're making the same mistake. Probably not to just get on your nerves, Gerard, but I bet it feels that way sometimes. At least it does for me when people do the same things over and over again. It's almost as if they got up that morning and said, "What can I do to irritate Linda today?" But maybe stepping back and saying, "Is there some training missing?" Yeah, Gerard, and that's very possible. I'm not in la la land, folks. I totally get that there may be people out there that don't care that they're doing these things to aggravate you, but here's the question you need to ask, Gerard, is how's that working for you to get upset? The other person you just said probably doesn't care, right? So your getting upset is detrimental to Gerard. And that's the thing we need to get a hold of. We can't go serve with an extra smile and go the extra mile if we're allowing those things to be detrimental to us, because not only are they making us negative, but that negativity then can cause relationship issues because we leave with that negativity, don't we? We leave work with that negativity. It can cause our stomach to churn, so we might have ulcers or get headaches or have high blood pressure or all those kinds of things. And so what we need to do is find a way to convince ourselves that although we would certainly like that person to behave a different way, we are not going to allow them to control the way the rest of our day goes. So stopping it in its tracks when you feel that frustration coming. My husband used to ask me because he had a bent toward negativity, and I would help him with that over the years, and he really wanted to improve, and God bless him, he did for several years, even while he was ill. But he would say, "How do I stop those thoughts?" Because when a coworker is making that same mistake over because they don't care, that's the first thought that comes into your mind, and you get angry and frustrated and irritated. And why do I have to do all the work? Those kinds of thoughts pop into your head. And I told him, I said, you cannot stop the thoughts. Those come. They come unbidden. We don't invite them in, but they come. What you need to work on is when the thoughts come, decide what you're going to do with them. Are you going to wallow? Are you going to spend time there? Are you going to let them affect the rest of your day and essentially the rest of your life because they do cause physical issues, don't they? So that decision when the thought comes is what really can make a difference for you. And you can say, you know what, that's that person's issue that they don't care about their job. If you need to report it because the work isn't getting done, that's a whole other issue, which may need to be done, and somebody may need to discipline that person. But in the meantime, don't let that person control your life, which is what's happening. And sometimes I think people enjoy that, honestly. I used to work with someone who actually thought it was funny when I was very young if he could make me cry. That is not a nice person to work around. It's real hard to give extra mile service, and I was in customer service if somebody's intentionally trying to make you cry. So I totally understand where you're coming from, Gerard. I also want to say to people that if there's something you want to delve in a little bit deeper than we're going to go with some of these things today, feel free to drop me an email because this is one of those issues that can be life changing for you. And I want to make sure I give you all the support I can to help you go a little further along being positive and being able to have that extra smile, even when other people are behaving in a way that would typically make you frown and be upset. So always feel free to drop me an email, and that address is at the bottom of your first page of your handouts. Jardine said, when somebody tries to justify doing something incorrectly. Yes, and that's a human thing, isn't it, Jardine? It's just one of those things where we all get defensive. We all try to find blame somewhere else, or, somebody else did it, or it was their fault I didn't get the right information, or whatever it is. It's a human tendency, and we need to, again, stop those thoughts and walk through. Let's talk about not who did it, but how can we keep it from happening again? And if we change our focus a bit, that can be helpful in that area. And Lisa said, if I'm tired, I lack patience. Oh, I'm right there with you, Lisa. My hand is raised high because when I'm tired, don't push my buttons. And sometimes I even remove myself from situations when I know I'm really tired, or I won't talk to somebody on the phone late at night, even a friend or whatever, if I know they're going to be negative, because I don't have any patience with that. Good to know that about yourself, isn't it, Lisa? So that you can take steps, first of all, to get proper rest, which is not always easy, but secondly, then to maybe limit your exposure in certain ways if you know that you lack patience. So I do that. I ask these kinds of questions right at the beginning so that you know where to focus your attention as we're moving through today's session. Number 4 says recognizing our own negativity, which is what I just asked you to do, requires self-awareness. Some of you are familiar with my webinars and face-to-face workshops on emotional intelligence. It was life-changing for me when I really got a hold of the concept of being self-aware and then managing those emotions. Because if I'm self-aware and I say, I know I don't like to deal with people, blah, blah, blah. That's just who I am. That's never going to give us an extra smile, is it? If I say, I know I don't like to deal with people when I'm tired, then I've got that self awareness. And then the next step becomes, what am I going to do about it? That's that self management I just mentioned, isn't it, Lisa? That's that self management that Gerard and Jardine and I were talking about, where we decide how we're going to respond. So you tell me, do you have a tool that you use to currently control your own negativity? Is there something that you specifically do that gives you a chance to step back and say, I'm not going to go there, or at least I'm not going to stay there? And I'm not saying you should, or it's necessary. It is necessary, and we're going to talk about some things to do. Melody said faith, absolutely. For a lot of people, you step back and say, this is not worth me getting all upset and being the negative person. I need to depend on something else. Elizabeth said, write an email and then delete it. Here's something else I do, Elizabeth, and you probably do too, the way you worded that. I don't put the person's address in the to line. It's too easy to hit send automatically, and then it goes out, right? So if anything, if I did want to put it to somebody, I'd put it to me, which is kind of like journaling, isn't it? You're basically journaling through an email. I was reading a journal of mine from 15 years ago over the past week. And I see from day to day how I struggled with some negativity. and dealing with certain people, and how the next day I would have gotten a handle on that to some degree and then moved forward. Glenn said, deep breaths and take a walk. Yep. Robert said, take a deep breath too. And as you're taking that deep breath, you need to have some self talk too, don't you? Abby, thank you, Abby. I'm glad you got back in. Think of what I'm grateful for. I have 1,800 and I think it was 88 things on my grateful list as of this morning because I find something every single day. I will admit that as I go back, I see a few repeats, but not a whole lot. I saw a red-breasted grosbeak a week and a half ago, and that went in my journal because I've never seen one. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. He was on my bird feeder. But my goodness, if you've ever seen one of those up close, it's something to be thankful for. And it made me smile. Can you hear the smile in my voice? So anybody that I talked to that day got the benefit of me finding something positive to focus on. Lisa said, I take a break and walk outside. Nature is proven to help us with these kinds of things. And Abby said, especially now when I can't hear this wonderful webinar. Oh, she still can't hear. Okay. A meditation mind break. Absolutely. We need that, Eric, don't we? So other tips, let's flesh out some more, and some of these may be duplicates from what you already said, but stop thinking at the extreme end of the spectrum. In other words, don't overgeneralize. And we do that, don't we? We talk about always. They always do this. My boss always does this. I never get any help. I never get to get Sundays off. This is completely not fair. Everything I do gets criticized. Do you hear that? When you're at that extreme end of the spectrum, and in the book that I was started reading today, that positivity book that I told you about, she started out by listing all the things we say can't. I can't believe this happened. I can't do this anymore. I can't get this done on time. I can't. It's overgeneralizing. So be aware of that. This might be an area that you need to work on to get back to that positive state of mind so that that smile comes back. Smiles are good for you, not just your patrons and your coworkers. A smile changes the actual chemical makeup of your brain. They've done scans. And in one study, they say oxytocin is secreted when you're smiling. And a lot of times when you're smiling and because you focused on something good, your brain accepts that as being what's right now. Don't filter out the positive. As all of you just talked about, we can find dozens of things a day if we look of positive things to think about, to focus on. Don't decide you're a mind reader. You're not. You don't know what they're thinking. And in reality, most of the time, it shouldn't matter to you. Somebody said to me once, I'm upset because I think they think. And I said, but why do you care what they think? I get that. I have suffered from low self-esteem since I was a kid. I work on it all the time. I think I'm better at it. I hope it never goes to the other extreme, but there's still that little core of me that feels less than. So I can be guilty of when somebody says something a certain way or they act a certain way. I decide this is what they really mean. We have no idea what they really mean, do we? The next one says, don't internalize negative events. It's not always about you, nor should it be. So don't make that all your fault. I was telling somebody the other day about something that I'd read in my journal that made me feel guilty. And I said I had to sit and talk to myself for a few minutes and realize there must have been a reason for that happening or whatever. And I had to let go of the guilt rather than internalizing that negative event because there's nothing I can do about it now, especially if it's in the past, right? We need to let go of those things and not internalize them. And at the bottom of the page, it says, don't try to enforce your own rules. I got to tell you, yes, Amber Denise, I see what you're saying there. I have a difficult time internalizing negative events. I'm going to use that word wallow, don't we? We grab hold of it. It becomes ours. We're responsible for it somehow. I have a friend that focuses on all the negative news that's out there, all the negative Facebook posts he can find. And I finally said to him one day, he was talking about something, he was in some kind of a discussion on Facebook, and I said, get off. My patience had run low, whoever said that about patience. And he kind of got quiet. I've known him for a long time, decades. And he said, yeah, I probably should. And I thought, okay, I did what I could do, right? He was internalizing all of that. And it was stuff that he didn't have any control over. So we need to try not to enforce our own rules, which is what I was doing in that instance. But in a sense, I was trying to protect myself because I didn't want to take in all of his negativity. But once I said, get off, and he decided he probably wouldn't, and I knew he probably wouldn't, we went on to something else. So I wasn't going to enforce my rules that way. I wasn't going to keep beating him over the head. But sometimes we feel that people should act a certain way or should feel a certain way. I have a friend that can't budget. She is way into retirement years. Her bills are late. She gets fined for bills being late, all those kinds of things. And I don't even go there anymore as much as it frustrates me because I can't enforce my rules on her. As long as she's not asking for money, which she has in the past, but she hasn't lately, then I can't enforce those rules because it can drag me down. We have to be careful of people dragging us down. Don't let your imagination go into overdrive. And that's those what ifs. What if this happens? Your imagination can certainly go into overdrive if it's, "Oh, what if we get extra funding and we get to have this program? And what if I'm able to help Mrs. Smith find that research she needs?" Certainly, I'll let you go, your imagination go into overdrive then, but not from the standpoint of all the negative stuff that could happen. Here's something you need to hear clearly. Enough negative stuff will happen that you don't have to imagine any, okay? Just hear that. And if you start going there and those thoughts start coming, you stop and you say one of two things. This is not serving me well, or how's that working for you? And you say that to yourself. I've said that out loud to myself. How's that working for you, Linda? And it always makes me smile because I know when I say it, I'm poking at myself, saying, you are not practicing what you preach. And y'all know I'm very transparent about those things. I'm not perfect at anything I talk about. But the reason I keep working on it is because I want to move a little bit farther down the road of doing it better. And that's the same case here. I don't expect you to leave a 60-minute webinar and say, whoops, I just flipped the switch. I am now positive. I can smile anytime I feel like it. I can smile all the time, and I can give that extra mile service. That is not going to happen as the result of a webinar. But if I can move you a little bit further down the road of being positive so that you can draw that extra smile from yourself when you need to, then I've accomplished what I need to accomplish today. Don't throw the negativity net over everything when something goes wrong. If you only had one person show up for a program that you put a lot of planning into, don't cancel all future programs. Take a step back and say, what went wrong there? What could we do differently? Did we market it well? Was it the wrong time of day? Don't say, well, never going to do that program again, because then you've got that negative pall over anything that even remotely resembles that particular program. Here's a tip that I use often, and this is that milk carton tip that I told you about. Practice reframing. If it's Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Smith is whining, instead of saying, oh no, here comes Mrs. Smith, if you reframe that to, I'm really going to make an effort to help Mrs. Smith today and see if I can get her to leave here as a satisfied customer. That's going the extra mile, isn't it? Because we all go out in our communities as customers where people don't bother with that, where maybe we have a problem or an issue and they're almost abrupt about it, trying to deal with it. And there's just no point in that. I got a phone call regarding me being the customer just this morning, and it was a message they had to leave. And I got this call that said, we've stopped by several times and you're never home. You know, that's not really a good way to go the extra mile with a customer because it's not a big request that I have. So they could have reframed that to say, so sorry we missed you, just calling to see if there's a good time to catch up with you. Do you see that difference in reframing? They made me defensive on the message they left. And they could have rephrased those words. It doesn't cost a penny to do that. It doesn't cost any extra mentally to do that. So practice reframing. When that thought comes to your mind, reframe it. And when you get in that habit, it's amazing how much difference that can make, and you actually start to recognize when it's happening and you catch it sooner and sooner in the process, which is also important. Don't read negativity into somebody else's actions. It's kind of like that reading their minds. Yes, they may have left the room when you came in, but maybe they had an appointment. Maybe they had a phone call they needed to take. Maybe they're off schedule now, whatever it is. But again, you shouldn't be deciding why they behaved that way. And even if you found out they left the room because they don't like you, that's their issue, not yours. So don't read negativity into somebody else's actions. I love this quote, and I don't know where I saw it years ago. Do I rise and shine, or do I rise and whine? Do I get up in the morning, I'm running late already, and I start whining about how awful the day is going to be? Or do I get up in the morning and say, boy, I must have really been tired. I slept a few minutes extra. Now I feel a little better. It's going to be a good day. All you're doing is reframing your thoughts when you're doing that. So ask yourself if you rise and shine or rise and whine. Now, let's talk about that was all about you that we just talked about. Let's talk about when it's negative coworkers. Key point, circle 7A, you cannot control others. Period. The end. We can stop the webinar now. We're not going to, but we could because you cannot control others. Another key point, you can't change others, can you? When we were talking earlier about the person that doesn't seem to care, can you make them care? No. A lot of times, even if you're the supervisor and you threaten them with possibly losing their jobs, that may still not make them care. So just understand you can't control them, you can't change them. We need to be aware that the only thing we can do is control how we respond to them. Sure, if we're their supervisor, we're going to use counseling, discipline if necessary, and whatever to try to get their behaviors in line with what's required for their job. But if we're doing that in a negative manner, the chances of them actually wanting to change their behavior for us is going to be much slimmer, isn't it? So you can and should control how you're responding to other people's negativity. If it arises from gossip, challenge it. You can say things like, are you sure? Did you hear that directly from the person that's involved? I said that to somebody a few weeks ago. I was having lunch with somebody and she made a casual comment that was very obviously gossip. And I said, are you sure? I hadn't heard that. And I wasn't trying to dig any deeper. I just wanted to get her to see that maybe we had stretched out outside the limits of reality. And that's what gossip does sometimes. Now, I do tell people I have certainly approved of gossip in the past when it's positive. If I say Deb does such a good job at signing and Deb's nowhere in the room, or I say, have you ever seen Deb sign? And somebody thinks, oh, what are you going to tell me? Is it something negative? And I say, she does such a great job. I love that we can add that to our webinars. That's good gossip. We'll go with that all day long. And you know what? That changes my attitude too, doesn't it? That brings out that extra smile because I made the extra effort of appreciating somebody's abilities. When the negativity results in drama, which it often does, please refuse to engage. You do not have to join every argument you're invited to or every negative situation you're invited to. You've heard the old adage, misery loves company, and you get invited to a lot of misery parties, don't you? Don't engage in that. Don't join that party. Don't take the bait that they've thrown out to you. Can you believe that even though they got extra funding this year, they're not going to let us do XYZ? That's what somebody's saying to you. Don't take that bait. You will go down that negative road and that person will walk away and maybe find something that makes them happy and you'll be dragging around that layer of negativity with you. And now you get to be the contagious one spreading it all over everybody else. So don't take the bait and don't feed the beast. Don't say something like, I know, I would have thought they would have done this or that or the other thing. Nah, stop. Again, I want you to know that these are not easy things to do, but I will also tell you that the more you practice the things we're talking about today, the more they become habit. The more they become habit, the more positive you are in general. The more positive you are, the more you smile. The more you smile, the better service you get and give. Are you seeing a cycle here? It's not that vicious cycle of negativity. It's that, if you want to call it victorious cycle of deciding you're not going to go there. F says, don't give negative people free rent in your head. And you know how that is. They say something, they walk away, and you mull that over the rest of the day. They are living inside your head and controlling your thoughts. And that's not going to serve you well. So don't give them free rent inside your head. Be aware of distance. Think about this. There are certain people that you might want to be physically distant from if you can. Can you keep your distance physically from certain people? Can you keep your distance mentally from certain people so that you're not joining in like we just talked about? You're not being engaged in whatever it is, that drama that they've created or that just totally negative focus that they've decided serves them well for some odd reason. So, do you need physical distance from somebody? Do you need mental distance from somebody? Do you need emotional distance from someone? I loved my sister to pieces. She passed away last year on Easter Sunday of last year. I miss her terribly. I will tell you, there were times when I was interacting with her, and she lives in Ohio and I live in Florida, that I would actually wait before I called her on a Saturday until I got my own emotional stamina built up, because I knew it would be negative. I knew she would go toward anything that made kind of like she was a victim. And so my goal was always to find something during that conversation, and it was usually 30 to 45 minutes long, that could make her laugh. Something silly that I had done, or just downright stupid that I had done that, caused myself aggravation or whatever. And somewhere in that conversation, I would make her laugh. And I always felt like I had to be prepared to do that, didn't I? I had to be mentally prepared for that. I was already at a physical distance, so there was no way that she could, I don't know how to put that without it sounding so cruel, but she couldn't come into my space without me being aware of the time she was coming in because she was so far away. But if I'm talking to her, I have to be mentally prepared. So, is there somebody in your life, and I don't want you to type this into the chat box, I just want you to think about it for a second. Is there somebody in your life that you need to make sure you have physical or mental or emotional distance from in order for you to have the positive attitude and outlook that will provide that extra smile for you? And if there is, you need to find techniques and ways of gaining that physical, mental, or emotional distance. It doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it all the time, but often enough. Several of you mentioned taking a break and just giving yourself that time to, Eric said, meditate a little bit. That would be part of this, wouldn't it? Possibly, if there was somebody around that was really causing you angst. So be aware of that distance that you might need. Toward the bottom of page 2, if you need to offset negative coworkers, spend more time with uplifting people. Matter of fact, if you've got your handouts there in front of you, write some initials down for uplifting people. Nobody can get mad about that. I won't have you write initials down for the toxic, negative people, but do write initials down for somebody uplifting. Who can you spend time with that always makes you feel a little bit better? Yesterday was my birthday. And so I have a dear friend that I have known for several decades who is a snowbird. And a few weeks ago we got together and she said, so when can we get together again before I go back? And I said, well, I know it's going to be kind of quick, but I'm taking my birthday off. She said, let's do it. Even before I said, can we do something that day or anything like that? I had the best day yesterday that I have had in a long, long time. We didn't do anything special. We went out, did a little shopping, didn't really buy much. I bought some journals. Imagine that. Ross has them for $2.99 and $3.99, by the way, if you need a journal, a gratitude journal, and they're beautiful. But we did a little shopping, and then we went and had lunch, and then we went and had dessert someplace else. and did a little more shopping, and we just both were so refreshed. So spend more time with uplifting people, because she said, I'm going to be going back in June. Let's find some time to get together again. And I will make a point of that, because I slept well last night. I woke up smiling this morning. So be aware of that. Leave the negative, toxic people behind, even if it's only in your mind. I deal with negative and toxic people sometimes, and they're not people that I can push out of my life. But sometimes I leave them behind in my mind, and I don't focus on that because it's not good for me to do that. Recognize how easy it is to absorb the negativity. I mentioned this earlier. It's such a human, natural response for us that we really have to be aware, self aware. Am I soaking up somebody else's negativity? I have one person that I spend time with occasionally that I've actually made a game of it inside my own head to refute the negative stuff they throw at me. It's like a ping pong game. I've got my little paddle up there, my force field, if you will. If there are any, I don't know if that's Star Trek or Star Wars because I don't watch those, but I've heard the term force field. I put my force field up trying to get that negativity to bounce off of me. And I have to tell you, for the last year or so, I've interacted with that person. I don't absorb that negativity anymore because I've been practicing that. And it does take practice, doesn't it? Kay says, don't let negative coworkers hold you hostage. In other words, don't stand there and listen to the negativity. Find something else, somewhere else to be if you can, so that you're not caught in this jail, if you will, like the little picture shows, of having to be subjected to that. Now, I know it's not always possible, but maybe, like several of you mentioned, I can take a 5-minute break and I'll say, I have to take these books over and reshelve them, or I have to go to the back and find this that Mrs. Smith needed, or I need to go get a drink of water or refill my water bottle, whatever it is. Break that connection where they're holding you hostage so that if and when you do come back into their space, that's over. That episode is over and you can move on to something else, hopefully. Another thing is to think about choosing your battles. I was talking to somebody the other day and I made a comment and they said, "Oh, no, that's not right." Real frown on their face. And I thought, you know what? I don't know whether it is or not. I think it is, but I just let it go. It wasn't worth me going to the negative of that person saying I was wrong. I can't even tell you what it was now. It wasn't a battle that I was going to engage in because I have enough real world battles to engage in my life. So choose your own battles. Don't waste time and energy trying to analyze or refute every negative comment. Like I said, I've got the one person I interact with just because I know that's what's going to happen constantly. And so it's not a negative thing for me anymore. I just let that bounce off of me and find good things. For instance, in my community, one day I was out walking my dog and a person said, "They used to take better care of the leaves around here. When I moved here, they blew the leaves every day." And I said, "That must have been expensive." Because I can't imagine hiring somebody to blow leaves every day in a community. So about 2 days later, I was out walking the dog, same person, they were blowing the leaves. This person said, "Could they be any louder?" And I just smiled and I said, "But at least they're blowing the leaves." And I just kept walking. So do you see how that can affect how you're behaving and how you're interacting with people? Some people are going to find the negative on everything. There is a fellow, he passed away, I think just last year, a year or two ago, named Jim Rohn, very big into helping businesses be more successful and employees be more productive and all those kinds of things. But he made a statement, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So I'm going to throw this out to you. If I said you could rate the 5 people you spend the most time with 1 to 10, with 1 being negative all the time and 10 being positive, and thinking about those 5 people, what would your average be? Think in your mind the 5 people, if you want to write initials down somewhere on a scrap piece of paper you can throw away, the 5 people that you spend the most time with. This is not scientific, by the way, but it gives you an idea, doesn't it? Rank them from 1 to 10. 1 is they're negative all the time. 10 is they're really positive, love spending time with them. What are their scores and what's the average of those 5 people? Because if you think about it, you absorb that, don't you? you naturally react the way other people around you are reacting. So be careful of what your averages are. Matter of fact, type your average in. Just thinking of that, you don't even have to have written anything down, but just first things first, as you're thinking, six, Gerard says. So, Gerard, think about this. If what we've talked about today helps you move your average to a seven, in whatever way that means, maybe it's more distance, maybe it's helping them be more positive, maybe it's how you respond to them, that would make a significant difference in your life, wouldn't it? That would be like a 16% increase in your score. That would be pretty significant. Think about that, folks. Remember, I'm not asking you to go to perfection here. I'm asking you to make improvements. Yeah, I know people like that. Somebody asked me why I'm still friends with the fellow I told you about. They said, if he's always negative, why are you still friends? I said, we've been friends for decades. He is the one person that when my husband was going through 2 radiation treatments a day in 2007, he called every other day to make sure he was okay. The only person in my life that did that. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? I'm never going to give up his friendship. He sent me a birthday card that was so sweet, so unlike him about what close friends we were and how we had built trust over the years that even though he's a minus 20 every time I talk to him, Gerard, I just get myself mentally prepared for that and I don't allow myself to absorb it. But he does affect my average, I will say that. Now, I don't spend time with him. I talk to him every couple weeks. Ernestine said 8. That's good. Let's move you to 8.5, Ernestine. And Danelle said 7. Let's move you to 7.5 or 8. Do you see where I'm going here? I want you to leave here today committed to making some sort of a change in what you're allowing into your life, into your head, into your mental space, so that we can move you on a continuum where it's easier for you to produce an extra smile and go the extra mile because that's where you live now. You live in that positive space. Number 8 says when dealing with negative patrons, remember we talked about you first, then we talked about coworkers. Now we're going to be realistic and say we know we've got some negative patrons. Sometimes you just need to let them vent because in our world today, nobody listens, do they? For instance, the technician that came last Monday and the boss never called back to apologize, technician didn't care, whatever. If somebody had just let me vent, the technician had to because he was in my house. But people aren't being listened to. So when somebody really listens to my concerns and expresses their sorrow for that or their apology or whatever it might be, then we can move forward and understand that the negativity they're exhibiting might have very little to do with your library and the experience they had there. Because if they just left some of the situations we all deal with, maybe it was at the bank or it was at a restaurant or it was at a grocery store or whatever it might have been, and then they came to the library, they're already fed up, aren't they? They may have started their day on a positive note, but because of what's out in our world nowadays and the lack of people really trying to go the extra mile in any industry, I have found there are very few that really try to make that extra effort, then their attitude coming in that front door may not even be a reflection of your library. It might be what they're already carrying. So understand that when they're starting to be negative with you. There are some words that might escalate that negativity. Just saying no, unless they say, are you having a bad day? If you say no with a big smile, that'd be good. But that's not usually how we use the word no. The word why tends to make people defensive, so just be aware of that. Are you sure is another phrase that seems to bother people. That's the policy with your arms crossed or your hands on your hips, whether you're physically doing that or not. If your tone of voice expresses that, there isn't an extra smile to be found anywhere because that person is going to go on the defensive. It may be the policy. Find a different way to say it because those words can escalate negativity. And once you've escalated it, I bet you agree with me that it's really hard to unwind and get back on positive footing within that same interaction, isn't it? You would have to really work at that. And there's a good chance that the person you're interacting with wouldn't be interested in working on it with you because they're offended. So be careful of your verbiage when you're dealing with a negative situation. When you remain positive, there's a good chance you can make a difference in their day. Years ago, my husband and I lived in Atlanta, and we had just recently moved there, and he happened to take a job that he wasn't real thrilled about, but we were kind of trying to find our footing and what we were going to do. And so at this job, the folks told him to go up to the Big Chicken and pick up our carryout order. And the Big Chicken in Atlanta is actually a big chicken. There's a building that has a humongous chicken on the top, and it's a landmark. So he went to the Big Chicken to pick up the order, and he wasn't sad or depressed or anything like that, but he was very pensive. And as she was getting his order ready, he was just staring off into space with this kind of pensive, melancholy look on his face. And she must have been a native Georgian, very southern accent. She came up to the counter with his order and she said, "I'm not going to give you your order unless you smile." And he never forgot that. That made his whole day that day. I think it might have made his whole week, just because that person did not choose to think, "Wow, he's negative and I have to wait on him." Do you hear that? It's just the thoughts we allow in our mind. She might have thought that, but she might have turned it around and said, "You know what? I'm going to make his day." What would happen to your extra smile, extra mile attitude if when somebody came at you with negativity, you could stay positive and you could help them turn their ship around a little bit? You could make their day, couldn't you? They could walk out in 5 or 10 minutes or whenever they leave your library and almost be humming because of their interaction with you folks. You are that special. You have that much influence over these people when you're giving them that extra smile or going that extra mile. So you might make somebody else's day. And if nothing else, it's going to make your day better. I promise you. Knowing and using somebody's name can also help them feel more positive. So if you say, "Mrs. Smith, I haven't seen you for a while. It's good to have you back in the library." It's going to be hard for Mrs. Smith to be too grumpy. She might just be a grumpy person, but I bet she's going to be a little more positive if you say something like that because people love their own names. It's our favorite word. We love to know that people know us as a human being. Understand too that you may play a part in a patron's negativity due to your own tone, your own facial expression, your own body language, like we talked about earlier. And you may think your body language is fine, but your tone could be saying something different. I tell people all the time, people can hear you roll your eyes on the phone and they laugh, but it's true. Because if you're rolling your eyes in derision at the person you're talking to or in a negative way, it's going to come out in your tone. So be aware of your own tone, your own facial expression, and your body language. If the negativity is coming via electronic communication, like somebody said earlier, you might want to type that response, but don't hit reply yet. Take their name out. Allow some reflective time before you respond, but don't react to it. This happens to me occasionally. I'll get an email from somebody that's almost just off-putting. It's so abrupt. And I stop and think about that and I think, okay, were they in a hurry? Are they mad at me? Do you see how my mind can go to the negative? Did I do something wrong? Are they upset? So I have to step back from that and say, you know what? I'm just going to answer it as if it's very innocent. Whatever they said, however they said it, I'm just going to answer it in a way that I'm just going to take it as a very innocent, neutral comment. And that's how I respond. Because if I react, that could cause a whole other issue, couldn't it? And that's not going to be good for any of us. So be careful of that. When you deal effectively with your patron's negativity, you may receive more loyalty from them in return. It's one of the things I mentioned right at the beginning when we started. The reason we want to make the effort to be positive and have the extra smile and go the extra mile, it does indeed affect our mental attitude. So that's a fabulous reason, but it also creates more loyalty with our patrons. And if we do that, we get more support from them, don't we? They tend to want to advocate for the library if we've created that loyalty. It's going to be the place they want to spend time because it's one of the few places they get that kind of reaction. So if you can help them deal with that negativity in a positive way, they're going to be more loyal. As I said, if somebody had called me about that technician last week and said, I thought sure he would be there by 9. It looks like it's going to be closer to 10. I still would have been a little bit aggravated, but I certainly would have been a lot less aggravated than I was when nobody called me. And I might have had some loyalty just because I know things happen. Maybe a truck broke down or whatever. But as you all said right at the beginning, there's no loyalty going on there because there wasn't any remorse, there wasn't any respect, there wasn't any caring, none of that. Now, after everything I've just said about that, I don't want you to discount negativity completely. Because when somebody is being negative, like I think it was Gerard that was saying earlier, when you think somebody doesn't care because they're doing the same things wrong over and over again, maybe that negative environment that's going on can teach us something. Maybe it says, this is not a good fit for this job. This person just is never going to do this well because they don't like it. They really don't care because it's not a good fit. If it's just a small part of their job, we'll just have to deal with that. But if that's the large part of their job, maybe we need to figure out what else we need to do. So there can be an education piece to this, but if we pretend we're dwelling on it so that we can learn something and tomorrow we're still dwelling on it, then we've just used that as an excuse to be negative ourselves, haven't we? So don't discount it completely. There might be something you can learn, but don't use that as an excuse to dwell there because it's not going to serve you well. Sometimes just finding a place to agree with somebody. If the patron is negative, they've come into your environment and they've said, your hours are so short that I can never get here on time or whatever it might be. You could say, I know we had to cut our hours when our funding was cut and we sure wish we could stay open more. You found a place to agree with them. They can't argue with you about that. Your funding was cut. You can't staff it. You agree that you'd like to do more hours. Sometimes finding that place to agree can be helpful. So a few more additional tips. Number one, keep a gratitude journal. I already mentioned that. When I started keeping mine a year and a half ago, I had read a grief journal and it said keep a gratitude journal. And so I wrote down, I'm thankful for my home, I'm thankful for my cars, I'm thankful for living in Florida. And then the next page said, don't just write down that you're thankful for your home and pretty much basically the same things I'd written down. It said be very specific because when you're very specific, you are looking every day for something to be thankful for. So keep a gratitude journal. This is my pastor in Ohio. I go to church online at a church that I attended when I was in Ohio. And he said this many years ago, and I never forgot it. He said, I'll share my joy with everyone, but I won't allow anyone to steal it. That has become my life motto. I don't always live up to it the way I want to, but it definitely is something to strive for. So keep that in mind as well. Ask yourself what went right today. Personal life, in the library, with the patrons, with the coworkers. What did you do well? Start focusing on that. The other day I was going to do handouts in one day. It was a new program. I was going to work on the handouts. It was actually for Swiftland on assertiveness. And I had all my research done. I had my notes made, and I thought, oh, I want to get the handouts today. I want to get the handouts done today. I got those done by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I thought, I'm going to do the answer key. I did that. Took me about a half an hour. I thought, I'm going to start on the slides. If I just start on the slides, I'll be happy. You know what? At the end of the day, I had the whole program done. I wrote it in my gratitude journal that I got the whole program done in one day. Abby says sometimes I need to just laugh at what didn't go right. But then again, I love comedy material. Yes. And as long as you can laugh at it, Abby, that's perfectly okay. It's when we let what didn't go right drag us down that becomes the issue, isn't it? Here's one that people are going to throw rotten tomatoes at me, but I say fast from the news. There's just too much stuff out there that's overwhelming. I don't ever watch the news on TV. Try not to listen to it on the radio when I'm on the road. I will actually switch it from the news. I do see headlines when I'm doing research and things like that, and I will tell you, I occasionally get drawn into that, at which point I click off of that and go look at funny pictures, look at funny videos, whatever it might be, because this is something that is in our face 24/7 with technology. Please be careful of that. My phone tried to start giving me breaking news, breaking news. It took me a half an hour, but I finally figured out how to stop that app from operating because I do not want that in my face. Exactly, Amber Denise. I can't remember the last time I watched the news either. I will flip to there to get weather on the ones, so I know what the weather is, but usually that's about as long as I stay. And if they're talking about somebody being murdered or children being abused or animals being abused or whatever it is, I get off of there. I don't care what the weather is. Watch out for ants. Some of you have heard me talk about this before. It stands for automatic negative thoughts. And we can have those about certain coworkers, our supervisor, our schedules, something we ate, we weigh too much, we don't exercise enough, we don't do whatever, it's so hot out, I hate Florida, it's humid, whatever. Be careful of those ants because they bite. And when they bite, you don't always get over it really quickly. So be very careful of your ants. Start collecting positive stories in your library. Actually write them down. I suggest to people use neon colored 3x5 cards. Let all of your staff in on this. Have everybody start writing enough details down that if somebody else picked up that card, they would think that's a really cool story. You don't have to write it word for word, but what happened and how did your library make a difference and all those kinds of things. So the question becomes, what is your most meaningful takeaway from today? What is something you will use, just one thing you will use from the 60 minutes you invested to make sure you're giving an extra mile and giving an extra smile and going the extra mile, which got covered up by the light bulb. Going the extra mile is what that says. What's one thing you're going to use? Practice reframing, Glenn. And again, if you ever have any problems with this, not really grasping it or not really getting what I meant by something or need some help digging a little deeper, please drop me an email. I love it when people email me because, first of all, I know they were listening. And secondly, I know they want to make a change and they're working on it. So please do that. So I'm going to wait for just a second. Practice reframing. Abby said I didn't give up. I only got the audio. Okay, good. Thank you. Danelle said thank you for the class. Okay. Watch out for ants at work, Eric. Yep, they bite. Ernestine said, understand you can't control or change other people. And Jordan said, stop on those ants before they grow because they also can get really big, right? Thank you, everybody, for being here. Georgianne said, don't overgeneralize. Lisa said, improve on making my space more positive. Yeah, Lisa, it can happen to us, can't it? We can get drawn into that negativity. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Hope to see you next time. Go have a positive day. Give that extra smile along with going the extra mile, and let me know if I can ever help. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Linda, for such a positive webinar this afternoon. Attendees, if you enjoyed this webinar, we ask that you join us on May 22nd for Linda's next webinar, Turning Patrons into Cheerleaders. As always, we encourage you to keep an eye on the Swiftland CE calendar, the Swiftland Facebook page, or your message from the listserv. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Deb.